Welcome back for our final session. Again, we have Nick Xanthopoulos. He's an attorney. And Nick, for this final session, again, we're so glad that you volunteered to come all the way here to share all this good information with us.
Well, I really appreciate it. In fact, community education is one of the things that we also do as a clinic.
Oh, so beautiful.
Glad to be here.
Okay, well, this evening for session 4, we're going to be talking about legal alternatives to the IRS taking people's income and other property. And we're going to turn it back to Nick.
So the starting point here, Tom, is a financial analysis.
Okay.
And that's done with what's called a collection information statement, which is actually, there are a few flavors of that form. But for most people, pretty much everyone we represent, they can go to 433-F. What that form is 2 pages plus some instructions.
Okay.
And basically it is, hey, what's your income sources and amounts? What are your necessary monthly living expenses? What are your assets and what are your debts?
Okay.
And like pretty much anything you sign before the IRS, it's under penalty of perjury, so got to make sure it's accurate.
Okay.
You also want to be able to document the figures that are on there. And so that's really the initial point, because that's how to determine how much you can pay, if anything, or if you can't pay, which in turn goes to which collection options best fit your circumstances.
Okay.
So I'll start by talking about options if you can pay the IRS. Ideally, you pay everything that you owe by the April 15th deadline. If you can't because you don't have the money, but you're certain that within the next few months you'll get enough money to do that, like back pay or settlement funds from your attorney, okay, then for free you can request a 120-day extension, and within that time, pay it all.
Okay.
I know we've mentioned it before, but it's so important, we'll talk about it some more. There are penalties and interest, so you want to reduce those by paying on time or eliminate it by paying on time.
You've emphasized several times, pay on time.
And that's because I've seen cases where the tax amount is, I'll just kind of make up figures here, but like $30,000, and penalties and interest is like $10,000.
Okay.
It can be huge amounts.
Yep.
So that's why it's so important.
Pay on time.
Exactly. If you can't, either by the deadline or with 120 days, but you have some money left over, you can request what's called an installment agreement. And that's where you make monthly payments towards the past due taxes.
Okay.
And a few things to keep in mind with those is, one, you can only get an installment agreement if you're current on your filing obligations.
Okay.
So usually that means you have to have filed all required tax returns for the past 6 years. Another reason to be in filing compliance, because life happens. Maybe you've been able to pay the IRS in full on time, but you lose a job or whatever. So you want to set yourself up for these options if you fall on hard times financially.
Okay.
Another thing to keep in mind about an installment agreement is that you only want to make affordable payments. So if there are discretionary spending decisions, that's one thing, but the IRS should not ask you to make such payments that you can't pay your transportation,
Gotcha.
or
Okay,
your housing or food or other necessary expenses. So that's basically how it works with installment agreements.
Okay.
The IRS does charge interest and penalties while you're paying on those, but with any luck, that's decreasing, because as you pay, so is the balance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there are also options, though, if you can't afford to pay anything. And I want to go back a bit, which I should have mentioned before. Some people think that it's a crime or they'll get in real trouble if they can't pay the IRS. And there's nothing wrong with being unable to pay the IRS. It's not a crime. When it might become one is if you're hiding your assets or you're hiding income.
Okay.
That's a whole other issue. If you're being dishonest, if you're evading tax payments, that's different. But there's nothing wrong with simply not having enough money to pay. So going back to that, if you have no money to pay, if your income doesn't cover your necessary living expenses, and if you don't have a whole lot of equity, then you should qualify for currently not collectible status, or CNC. And like all of these options, you have to request it. It doesn't just happen, even if you qualify for it. And the way it works with CNC is that the IRS pauses collection action while you're in that status, meaning they won't levy your income. They shouldn't take your income.
Okay.
What may happen is if you owe $10,000 or more total in taxes, the IRS would likely file what's called a notice of federal tax lien. And for most people, those that we serve certainly, the main consequences of that are, one, it's a public record, so it's going to be on your credit report and affect your credit score.
Okay.
But also, because it's a public record, to tie back to an earlier session, you likely start to get some mail that might be from some downright fraudulent companies, unfortunately.
Because it's a public record.
Exactly.
Okay.
But people usually should not be too concerned about a notice of federal tax lien, because for most folk, it's simply for the IRS to secure its interest. It's relatively rare for the IRS to enforce one of those. But these are kind of the basics of CNC.
Okay.
Although last but certainly not least, this one is available even if you aren't in filing compliance. So it's different from an installment agreement.
Okay.
Let's say, Tom, that you owe 2015 taxes and you haven't filed another return since 2000.
Okay.
That should not get in the way of whether or not you qualify for CNC.
Okay.
And for any year that you owe, whether it's an installment agreement or a CNC, you've got to request that each tax year you owe is put in that status or that agreement, because you want all of it to be in collection alternatives, not just some and some not.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah. So that's really how CNC works.
Okay.
The final option for a lot of people is the offering compromise, OIC for short. And that's the tax settlement program that you've likely heard on the radio or other advertisements.
Okay.
And the way that that works for most people is, it's actually, there are different kinds of OICs, but the most common one is called doubt as to collectability. It's basically, hey, IRS, here's how much that I can pay you that you wouldn't otherwise get, like money that's a gift from friends or family, or something that's not subject to a levy.
Okay.
But what's really important to know about an OIC is that it's a conditional settlement. Meaning, let's say that you owe the IRS $10,000 and they accept an offer in compromise for $1,000.
Okay.
And you pay that $1,000 in full at once. You might think, hey, this is great. I no longer owe this $9,000. It's gone forever. Well, again, that depends, because the conditions of the settlement, there are two. One is that for the next 5 years, if you're required to file a tax return, you have to by the April 15th deadline. If you're even a day late, a day late, you default.
Okay.
You owe everything you have not paid. You owe the $10,000 again.
Oh, me. Oh, okay.
Similarly, if you don't pay your new tax in full by April 15th, you're also in default. So it's really important to not just apply for that, but to think about the consequences, because 5 years is a long time.
They don't tell you that in the commercials.
Buyer beware. But it's really important to keep that in mind.
Okay.
But,
whenever I hear that commercial now, I'll remember these words. Okay.
But given that, it can be a great program.
It can be a lifesaver.
Yeah, because let's say that life happens. Maybe it's just 1 year or two that you owed a lot of money, but that's not usually how it works. Or you regularly filed late, or you didn't file, but you've realized what's that is meant for your financial life, maybe personal life, and you've changed your ways. It's not going to happen again.
Okay.
Might also be a great alternative. But I've got to be honest, when I explain this to people, I'd guess that roughly half have heard of the tax settlement program say, you know what, no thank you, I'm not interested, because it is such an important condition, and one that's rarely mentioned.
Definitely rarely mentioned. It's one I hadn't heard of. like I said, I've seen the commercials on TV, and I look at that, but I'll listen to them differently now. Okay. I do want to say too that, and as an attorney, I didn't have to say it. You know, I wanted to make sure that Nick spoke to us in non-legalese, which is what he's done. And I'm very glad that he chose to do that. He gave us all this information that we could understand, and in ways we could understand it, not being attorneys ourselves. So I hope you've gotten all of this information he's passed out today, and maybe sometime in the future we'll do this again. But I just want to make sure that you understand IRS is not our enemy. It takes care of so many things in our country, and that's what taxes are all about, us supporting our nation.
And if I may add, one thing I forgot to mention, which I really want to, is there's also a truly independent part of the Internal Revenue Service called the Taxpayer Advocate Service, or TAS for short. So people can go to irs.gov and search for TAS to learn more about it. Because the website, by the way, is taxpayeradvocate.irs.gov. And they can be very helpful because certain cases mean that you qualify for their assistance. Let's say, for example, that you expect a refund on your 2016 tax return, but you owe earlier taxes. Usually the IRS will just take that refund and apply it to what you owe. But if you're about to be evicted, for example, and you have no other money to get current on your rent, like $500, let's say, you can go through TAS to request a hardship refund, where you get $500 of your refund to get current on your rent and avoid eviction if you can't otherwise afford it.
Look, we're running out of time again, as we always do. But again, we're going to have another outstanding program next month for you. But for today, we had Nick Xanthopoulos. He was here today. He's an attorney, and we're providing his information so that you know your tax benefits and how you can benefit from this. So Nick, thanks again for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.